Hi again, everybody, and welcome to a new edition of Newsmakers TV. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Friday, August 8th, and we are joined by our all-star panel of top local journalists, Christina McDermott, who covers housing and other matters for the Santa Barbara Independent, Nick Welsh, the angry poodle his own self, and Josh Molina, man of many hats, and voice of the popular Santa Barbara Talks podcast. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Christina, I want to catch up with something which we somehow missed in all of the excitement about Fiesta, which is that the in this ridiculous rescissions deal that the Congress did, taking money back that they had already approved, public broadcasting basically got zeroed out. And I know you're a veteran of public broadcasting and watch that closely. But basically, this all comes from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which no longer has a budget. How does this affect us?
Yeah, so we have a couple public broadcasting stations kind of located within the Tri-County area. We have KCLU, which broadcasts up here, and that's in Thousand Oaks, and we have KCBX, which is in SLO County and broadcasts into our North County area as well. And they'll both take a hit. They're both going to lose money. Um,
Do we know how much?
Yeah, so KCLU will lose about $300,000 of allocated funding. And they've already run a summer fund drive. I don't know how successful it was, but it was their first summer fund drive ever, kind of as this all
Oh,
was
so now they're going to have all full-time fund drives going.
pretty much like they're going to need this is how they're going to get their money essentially to keep operating. And then KCBX will see actually a bigger cut. They're a rural station. Rural stations got more money from public broadcasting funding, and so they'll lose a total of $440,000, 240,000, which was just direct funding, and then $200,000 specifically for music licenses because they also play music. Um, Neither station is going to shut down or fire people, which is great. Like San Francisco had a station that laid off a bunch of people after the cuts were announced. But it does
KPD.
mean they're not going to grow at all.
Yeah.
They're
And
going to get
how about T? Hi, Callie. Callie Fausey has joined us from an undisclosed location, as you can tell by her background. What about PBS? What about PBS SoCal? Is there any
yeah.
hit to that?
They will, yeah, they'll lose money too. I haven't been able to talk to them. They cover a wider region, but PBS generally actually takes more money than radio from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And so they'll just have less money. And I don't know specifically how that's going to affect PBS SoCal, but it is a big hit to the budget. And I think it's worth noting too that there was a lot of political attacks on public media because of national coverage, specifically political coverage, but actually most of CPB's funding, 70% went to local stations and local TV stations and things like that. It actually wasn't going, 30% was going to national stuff, but the vast majority was not. And so you will see it play out in local stations.
All right. So at least as for now, KCLU, which is most immediate, affects us, says you shouldn't see an impact except that there will be an endless fund drive going on.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah, they might need to. I don't know exactly their plan, but they may need to have more fund drives. They'll have to depend more on everyday citizens because they won't have that money coming in from the federal government.
well, we all rely on the dulcet tones of Lance Orozco for local news, but seriously, the in terms of fires and stuff like that, I mean, they're just invaluable. What about your old station up in there in left wing Alaska?
Yeah, they're gonna be in trouble.
Callie's gone. Okay, that was Callie's short. I was just going to pivot to Callie, and she left.
Yeah. Well, I
Uh,
mean, I don't exactly know how in trouble they are, but rural stations are in more trouble than urban stations because they have a smaller base of people who can support them financially, like donation base. And they tend to cover areas that, you know, not always, but that have a lot of poverty, people who can't necessarily afford to donate money. Um, and KDLG, which is where I was up there, covers the Bristol Bay region, which is about the size of Ohio. It's got about 7,000 year-round people. And a lot
size
of
of Ohio,
size of
really?
Ohio, yeah. It's the only news source there, period. Pretty much. There's some community newsletters in the villages, but I think beyond that, and there's not reliable internet everywhere. Um,
Yeah.
like there's no fiber optic. It's all satellite or microwave. And so it will take a huge hit if something were to happen to that station. And I know they got a lot of money from the feds. And so something, I don't know exactly what's going to happen up there. And I really hope that they're able to sort of figure something out, band together. Maybe the state can do something, the local tribal administration, but um,
Yeah, well,
stations like that are in a lot of trouble.
Lisa Murkowski
Chris-
has that blood on her hands,
Yeah.
among others.
Christina, so funding, right, is one thing, but and obviously fewer journalists is horrible, no matter, where they're at. But as a practical matter, the impact of losing this public funding to these news organizations, I mean, what does it mean? Like, what is the for people who may not listen to these stations, what's unique, what's different, what kind of service do they provide in sort of the news landscape out there?
Yeah. Oh, in generally or in Alaska specifically?
No,
Uh,
going back to locally with sort of the federal funding cuts to public broadcasting.
Yeah. So local stations, they provide local news like we do. So they have that service, but they also can provide emergency services or emergency alert systems. I know KCBX does that specifically because they do cover rural parts of our county and SLO County. Um, and they do provide news to people who don't necessarily have access to the internet,
Mhm.
which in California, a lot of people have access to the internet, but about 3.5 million don't. I spoke to someone at KCBX who was talking about how they have broadcasting for the prison up there. And so they have prisoners listening to local news. So it is just like another outlet for local news.
And they do,
And particularly in those
and they
rural
do
areas
cover
where they
some of
don't have
they
internet.
do,
Yeah,
they do carry some of the national program.
they do. Yeah, they have national news as well.
Which is
But
what the
yeah,
big,
they're very valuable for places that maybe don't have, they aren't as connected um, as urban places.
all right. All right. Well, continuing with our theme of the reality TV show host President's Assault on Democracy. Callie, you've had a couple of stories recently about federal cuts. One to Planned Parenthood, which was really going to take us a massive hit, I think $17 million, and also public school funds, specifically to the Santa Barbara Unified School District. Those are both kind of in limbo. Where do we stand on those two things?
Can you hear me?
Yep,
Okay, great.
we can
Uh,
see it too now.
my computer crashed earlier. Sorry about
Oh,
that.
okay.
Yeah. But for school funding, they were supposed to, I mean, federal government froze the funds for schools that was going to different programs like after school programs, and like English language learner services and teacher trainings, froze like I think 811 million for the state of California and 6 billion across the country. So they froze those funds for what they called an ongoing programmatic review, which is basically, I think, code for we want to freeze out schools until they stop, implementing what they call like DEI,
Woke.
diversity,
Go
equity,
woke.
and inclusion.
And
Yeah,
that
yeah.
was and it was about 900,000 to Santa Barbara Unified.
It was about yeah, just shy of 900,000. I haven't checked again with the school district, but they should have been getting the funding this week or last week as of like I think it was like Thursday last week they still hadn't received the funds. Um so I need to check back in with them, but yeah, they're supposed to be getting it. So
But
hopefully they
how is
will.
that? I mean, how is that going to work? So they froze the funds, they unfroze the funds, maybe they'll cut a check, but they cut a check. But what they're objecting to is what Santa Barbara Unified does. It's what Hilda Maldonado does. I mean, It's stuff for poor kids. It's stuff for kids of color that meet both of those categories, English language learners. I mean, it sounds like programmatically they just want to get rid of all of that.
You know, and the school district was kind of proactive about them cutting what is called, I think it's Title III that does English language learner services and that kind of thing. The district planned not to have that money from the federal government. So she said they're reorganizing their budget. They're figuring out where they can take money from their local control and accountability plan to kind of make up for the funds that they're losing from the federal government in that sense. Yeah, so I don't know how it's going to play out. I think they've been kind of cautious about how they name their programs. Like nothing in Santa Barbara Unified is called, specifically like diversity or something like equity or inclusive or whatever.
God forbid. And what
So
about the Planned Parenthood money?
Planned Parenthood, I think despite like there was like back and forth, there was like a temporary restraining order that stopped it from happening. That expired. They lost the funding. And then a judge ordered like a preliminary injunction on it, which also temporarily stopped them from losing the funds. But I think that with the one big beautiful bills passing, the effects are being felt like across.
So that's basically
country right
through
now.
Medicaid that money is going to be lost, and it's a lot, right? It's like $15 million or something.
Yeah, it's Medicaid reimbursements, and for Planned Parenthood, Central Coast, like our Planned Parenthoods, including the one in Santa Barbara, that's about a combined $17 million in funding that goes towards not just abortion services. It's cancer screenings, it's STD testing, it's like birth control. It's making sure that people who can't afford these services can have access to them.
But they're cutting money for all those services specifically because they provide abortion.
Because it's a attack against the Planned Parenthoods who continue to provide abortions. I mean, like public officials have been calling it a backdoor abortion ban for a reason. They're essentially defunding Planned Parenthood, which is an attack on women, to be blunt.
All right, we got to get Luz on here to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
And then Nick, we talked last week about people being afraid to go out to Fiesta because of the ICE raids. I guess they didn't materialize, but you wrote a story that clearly established the crowds were either bigger or smaller.
Bigger or smaller. If you talk to Fritz Ollenberger, the El Presidente of old Spanish days, he was saying there was about the same, as big or bigger than a usual year. If you talk to people that actually went, and you got anecdotal accounts, it was a lot easier to get to the front of the line of the Fiesta parade on Thursday. It was a lot easier to find parking spaces for the children's parade on Saturday. And if you went to Our Lady of Guadalupe, the taco line, which is usually around the block, was a lot faster. But the cops have only recently released their crime stats, and it's about the same. Most of it I hear is sort of about the same or less than. When you walk down there, depending on when, it was pretty easy to get through the crowds. But at night when the music was happening, it was a lot tighter. But really, to me, the most interesting and exciting news for Fiesta almost had nothing to do with the Fiesta organizers, but it had to do with these bands, banda music, which is Mexican music, which is typically a tuba, trombones, a couple of trumpets, a drum, a big bass drum, and a snare drum. and they sort of popped up spontaneously on Lower State Street. And they
By the
just
tunnel, below the tunnel?
no, it was a little bit up from there. 500, 600 bucks, thereabouts. And people were dancing. And it was just sort of a spontaneous eruption of, hey, we're not afraid. It wasn't even political. There was this magical quality. In terms of ICE, I think two things were happening. A, there's no sighting that anybody had. I mean, Callie was working at a restaurant, the beer garden, and people thought they saw ICE there, but it turned out it was out of town cops. And the management said, hey, if you guys are uncomfortable and afraid, you can cut loose and go home early. But there was a couple of false alarms people had about ICE, but there was no ICE that anybody saw it. Now, there was a restraining order in effect, and it's still in effect, where the Justice Department had been, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals said, you can't go stopping people just because they happen to be brown. That does not qualify.
Racial profiling is illegal, it turns out.
It doesn't qualify as probable cause under the Constitution. Now, and that seemed to have a big effect. The LA Times has a cover story today about the number of sort of people picked up in sort of mass raids way down. But then I think it was 2 days ago, 3 days ago, ICE had this, They
There's a rent-a-truck at a Home Depot. I mean,
yeah, they took a big Penske rent-a-truck to a Home Depot, and then sort of load. They said, "Hey, I'm looking for workers," and people said, "Oh yeah," and then they went after them. So I don't know how that's going to fit into the probable cause.
So proud to look in the mirror that they work for ICE.
But,
Josh,
yeah.
you had we talked about a little bit last week with Nick that you sort of had the defining piece about Fiesta this year about whether people would be too afraid to go or not. But within that, there was some commentary about the whole notion of Fiesta, old Spanish days, the leadership, Fritz Holenberg's tone deafness, and so on and so forth. What's going to happen? Is that going to change? You think the Fiesta?
I would say there's kind of a small but significant seismic shifts happening here. And the number of people who are going, I like Fiesta, but what's with this old Spanish days is growing. And it's not just your typical woke demographic, it's across the board. And where we really first started seeing signs of a big shift was when we were talking about the murals at Ortega Park. And it went before the Historic Landmarks Commission. Now, you don't get older white men more concentrated than in that commission. And they were coming very
well, except on this show.
Except on this show.
There's almost as many there as there are journalists in this town.
And they were like, hey, we need to really protect these murals. And they trust for historic preservation, which really is all about old Spanish days and the Spanish history. They also joined in that one. And there was a conversation taking place where people are trying to get rid of the name Old Spanish Days because it was obvious colonial history and the impacts on the Chumash that you really can't overstate.
Yeah. Josh, what's your take on this?
I think that this may be the last year of Fiesta as we know it. I don't know exactly what it'll look like next year, but I think Nick is correct in that there is a shift, and how big that shift is depends on how hard people want to work between now and next year. I know that Andy Garcia, who is on the Ortega Park SB, sort of one of the co-founding members there, is trying to start a new celebration called Vida Santa Barbara, where the focus is on the people who celebrate Fiesta and less so on the old Spanish days board of directors. And so I think that whether it happens next year or in a couple of years, that is the shift that is happening, because there's always been a tale of two fiestas. There's the fiesta where people party, celebrate, have fun, see old friends, eat, gather, fun stuff. And then there's the organized dignitarios type events that Old Spanish Days puts on. And those worlds are very separate. So it makes sense that David Bolton and Fritz Ohlenberger would say the crowds were the same or more. But if you were actually down there in the parts where the people celebrate, it felt slightly less. It felt a little bit less than in years past. And I'm sure that the homicide during Fiesta on State Street may have affected some people as
Callie,
well.
I want to ask you about that because the cops in recent years have really made an effort before Fiesta to try to do what they could to tamp down gang violence stuff. But this was the poor fellow that got stabbed to death down there. That was it. I guess it's where it's established it was a gang related incident. Yes.
I don't think the victim was
Right.
a gang member. But the two men who are being charged with his murder are registered gang members. Yes.
And do we know any more about how the incident unfolded, or why this guy, or was it random violence, or what happened?
You,
Yeah.
I've kind of heard different kind of accounts. We have like what the police are saying, like, oh, a passerby waved down some police on foot patrol during Fiesta activities, that saying there was like a fight going on and someone, had a knife, and it says like police intervened, multiple victims like came up to them or were collapsed on the ground with knife wounds to their torsos, and police administered first aid, and then they went to the hospital, and the one victim, Anthony Bascara Hartley, succumbed to his injuries in the hospital. And but then there are some accounts of I haven't seen these videos myself, but I know I read Josh's piece. I think Josh maybe had seen them, of people documenting the fighting, and what looks to be like police having like a slow response or not responding to a victim on the ground. So
All
And the
right.
other, just, I mean, that's going to be one of the questions that people are going to want to know. How fast was EMT, emergency response, administered there? The other thing, one of the assailants, Juan Fernando Rios, it turns out, like, I think it was on July 27th or 26th, he had been pulled over for a DUI, and at that time he was in possession of a loaded handgun. And, in 2018, he was sentenced to 4 years in prison because he shot 4 people on State Street. And one of the, he is not allowed to have a gun, period. So we're trying to figure out how it was he got cut loose on bail as quickly as he was to be in a position to shot people on State Street during Fiesta.
And of course, the elephant in the room, which you can read about on SP Current, but the local law enforcement does not cooperate with ICE. They don't ask about people's immigration status.
Okay, but
I
let's just
guarantee you that if this is going to be a question that comes up, if ICE has anything to do about it.
Oh, I think it is, but do we have any idea that Rios is
No,
not?
I'm not. I'm saying if it is, ICE is going to find out, and it's going to be a big deal.
But yeah, there's no information yet that he's not an American citizen.
Yeah.
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 And I know that Andy Caldwell is quick to say, accuse the supervisors of murder, I think is what he did on this one. I think the first question you want to find out is, what happened with the bail and how he got out so quickly.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk a little housing. Christina, you had the Joseph Pulitzer famously said, "News is that which is apt to be talked about." And you had the talker of the week with this story that you now need to earn $55 an hour, which of course everyone on this program is making easily, $55 an hour to afford to live in Santa Barbara. What's that all about? What's that study?
Yeah, so the city does this rent survey every year, since I think 1997, they said. So it's been a while, but to double check that number. And they basically take a month they contract someone to take a month of the year and look at all the listings on Zillow and Craigslist and sort of cross-reference things. They have their own database as well, and just make estimates to what the median rent is. And so in that sense, and they have a bunch of categories. They have like condos, single family homes, apartments, um, townhouses. I don't really know the difference between renting a condo and renting an apartment. That is unclear to me because I thought a condo was something you owned. But yeah, so there's like lots of different categories of data, and some of the categories don't have very much data. There's like two listings for the snapshot of time they looked at, April. But others, like the one bedroom units in Santa Barbara, had like 78 listings, so you can start to actually look at what a median would look like. And so they got that number 55.43 an hour by looking at how much you'd have to make to get the median one bedroom of all those listings, and spend no more than 30% of your income on rent, which is the definition of being rent burdened, is when you spend more than 30% of your income on rent. So that's where that number comes from. And
And you did the math, since unlike Nick and I, you can actually do higher math, and that works out to how much a year? What's a
so
year?
I just plugged in like how much is 55 an hour if you're working a 40-hour work week and you presumably have paid vacation, and it's about $115,000 a year, to afford a median one bedroom rent and not be rent burdened or not be spending more than 30%
And
on
then
rent.
you also, we were talking a little before the show about the trend line on this, that there was a spike, all sort of counterintuitively right after the pandemic.
Yeah, that was something I actually plugged in some numbers into Excel and was looking at, is that there really is a big jump into the percentage increase year over year between 2021 and 2022, like across the board. It's increasing, from 2015, which was when I like looked at between 2015 and now, but the biggest increase is at that point. And in some play like I think for South County, this is a South County study. I think it was around 33% of a rental jump between those years for one bedrooms, but I'll double check that one. It might have been two bedrooms. But you can see the jump, and I did some research, and like this happened in places around the nation. It's called shelter inflation. So just
Shelter
rent got,
inflation. That's a
yeah,
lovely.
yeah, got much more expensive. And now it seems that I've been like poking around looking at certain like explanations for it. And those are all kind of coming out 2024, 2025. So it's been a couple years, but they're fairly fresh, and people have different reasoning for why that is. I think it's probably a combination of people moving around during the pandemic. There's an argument that even less got built. This is on the national level because of supply chain issues and price gouging and things like that. But I don't know if that explains what's happening in Santa Barbara specifically. Uh, it would be really interesting if someone like looked into that specifically about, why did rents go up so much between that time and why haven't they come down? They actually, yeah, they
Well, if
still go
only
down.
there was a weekly newspaper that had a fellowship for someone to cover housing, that had a time that could look into that. That would
I
be
could. I don't know if my math skills can do quite that much, but I could try.
yeah, Nick will help you out. And then Josh, on the council this week, the vacation rental issue was back, and the entirely unproven by any evidence brought to date theory that vacation rentals somehow are making this all worse came to the fore. What did they decide to do?
I'm still trying to figure out the vacation rental issue from Tuesday's meeting. It was kind of confusing and complicated, but what I reported was, they believe that there's a housing crisis, and there are homes in Santa Barbara that are rented out to as short-term vacation rentals. And people are allowed to do this in areas where it's also zoned for a hotel. But you have a proliferation of illegal short-term rentals that are happening in neighborhoods. And so the city's contention, the city attorney, several members, probably all the members of the council believe that these illegal short-term vacation rentals could be better used if they were rented to
If
local.
only the government would force these people to rent out their room and charge a tax if they wouldn't, which apparently is Wendy Santa Maria's big idea.
So they believe that it would be better. And if they're not going to do that, then they want to regulate them and tax them and get some benefit to the city and taxpayers. And so that's what's happening. They have started this enforcement program. They've been able to collect back taxes from many of these individuals, but it's still a thing that people do. They advertise Airbnb online and they don't want the city to know about it. The city wants them to have a business license. So if you are going to rent your home as an Airbnb, you've got to have a business license and it has to be displayed on your Airbnb advertisement. In addition to this, they're saying, okay, let's try a home sharing ordinance because one of the other problems for those neighborhoods that have these vacation rentals is that there are parties and there are events. And on the border of Hope Ranch, there's a Bramer Lane, which has these big lots, and there's like events and parties, and there's a lot of concern about the impact on the neighbors from these short-term vacation rentals. So this home sharing ordinance says you should be home. The owner of the house needs to be home. So if a neighbor wants to complain and knock on a door, they can find that owner and hopefully take care of things. Because right now, if you have an illegal short-term vacation rental and the city doesn't know about it and there's a big problem in your neighborhood, who are you going to complain about? So that's the thinking, Jerry. Obviously, most people will, they're never going to rent to a local family in need if they have an extra house or room. We know that. But if there are some people who can be retrained in the mind that it's better to have less money but help the community.
Re-education camp, I think, is the phrase you're searching for there.
They're sort of hopeful of that too. And I know Wendy Santa Maria, was sort of very strong on that. That if people are going to do that, they're going to do that.
Well, I definitely think they should send the police around and inventory your house, and if you have an extra room, force you to rent it out and tax you very highly if you don't. I think Wendy's absolutely right on that. Hey, Nick, the most interesting thing in Josh's story about this that I discovered, which is that Mike Jordan has chickens in his backyard, but I don't know if you knew that, but
I didn't know that. Yeah.
yeah, you and I and Josh are old enough to remember when we went to meet secretly with Rebecca Bjork, who told us the exciting new future of Paseo Nuevo, which was going to include, I don't know, 27,000 units of low-income housing. It appears now that number has shrunk substantially. What's the latest on the Paseo project?
The latest on the Paseo Nuevo project is they're talking about putting 233 units of housing where Macy's is. And it will go up, I think.
How many? I'm sorry.
233.
233.
And that was somewhere in the ballpark of 75 feet high, which is about 15 feet higher than the existing height band on State Street would be. And they are going to, initially they were talking somewhere in the ballpark of 500. And that number has come down because of structural limitations and the cost of building a massive new foundation. And I'll spare you on the structural issues, but that number isn't really workable anymore. The interesting real pivot here, there's two of them, is that parking lot 2, which is up by San Bernardino and Chapala Streets, they are talking about converting that into 80 units of affordable housing. So that would be all at 80% the average median income and lowered, but we don't know what the mix would be. And that would have to be built at the same time as a high-end glitz. So what people are talking about at Paeo Nuevo is very high-end. There's been talk about Erewhon and Italy as being like a 17,000 square foot specialty grocery store. The other thing is they're talking about 25,000 square feet. That is a lot for a gym. I don't know how many gyms we need in Santa Barbara. It seems that we have a lot. It seems that a lot of them are constantly going out of business. But that is sort of the placeholder that they're talking about now.
A much different project than we heard about being envisaged at the beginning.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say a little bit that it's kind of cool. They're keeping the mall, the interior of the mall. They're not going to demolish the whole thing. So that's one change. The inline stores, as they're called. But it also feels like a little bit of a desperate move on the part of the city of Santa Barbara. They're going to give away the land underneath the mall and the parking lot too, because they're so convinced that if they don't do this, that the developer and the investment firm, which owns the long-term leases, will just abandon the deal and we'll have this Paseo Nuevo as it is for 40 years without a reinvestment. And so it feels they want to give them some property tax equivalent, including the land, 32 to 39 million. And they're going to build market rate downtown. Now, there's reasons for why they can't build the affordable there. Tax credit funding, so it has to be its own project off to the side. But it just feels like AB Commercial and Georgetown, the developers, are basically saying, if you don't do all of this, then we're not going to invest in the mall. They can't sell the mall, they say, right now because nobody would want to buy it because there's 40 years left on this lease and they would need a guarantee of longer for their loan financing. And so it feels a little bit weird. I mean, I would say as a practical matter, this plan is better than the other one, but 233, and we're talking about market rate, and you know what Christina just talked about. By the time these things are built, they're going to be $10,000.
Okay. They're going to
downtown.
be super. I mean, I wish it makes you chop up a big football going, wait, we're going to give all this land and that's all we're going to get. But nobody has made a case in the last couple of years why the basic premise that you are expressing skepticism about is wrong. The city is saying our land is worth nothing. And of course, you go, wait a minute, this is the most expensive real estate next to Mecca. But it is kind of worth nothing. And with only 40 years left on it, its marketability is very limited. And so it's this game of chicken the city is playing with Alliance Bernstein. And they aren't developers. They just got stuck with the land because the person they loaned the money to defaulted and they have it. So they're kind of like, what do we do with it?
Yeah.
So it is really a lose-lose, win-win deal.
Yeah. We'll be talking about this for a while.
For a long time.
But before we get out of here, I just want to close on housing real quick, Christina. The Battistone folks, the elderly people that got the sudden eviction notices were back before, or at least some of them before council this week. What's the status of that?
Yeah, so they haven't been evicted per se. The building is still up for auction. And I don't think anything substantial has changed in the past couple weeks. They're just trying to raise awareness that they're there. They're hopeful that a nonprofit will take interest in buying the building. The foundation for itself is holding a private auction, which means they've said they want to sort of prioritize people who will continue the mission of it. Although that's not a promise per se. I still haven't heard when this private auction is happening, but that would be the next good piece of information to have.
All right, we'll keep an eye on that. And then before we leave, I just want to send out a word of thought to Peter McDougal's family and friends. Peter McDougal was a community hero with capital letters. He really was a former president of City College who really rejuvenated that institution, but also just did everything. He was on every single board and every single important fundraising, and he was just a great guy and a great San Franciscan. And he passed away, I guess, a couple weeks ago now at 85. Nick, you want to say a word about Peter?
Peter McDougal, I mean, he was president of City College for 21 years. In the 23 years since he has left, we've had 9 presidents take over. He made it look easy. It wasn't. So it's very easy to kind of go, he was sort of the Rocky Gibraltar in the good old days. The days have changed, but I have never seen a guy work the room the way Peter McDougal works the room of the City College cafeteria, which used to have the best lunch deal in town because its culinary arts program prepared the food. The guy was a masterful politician in that sort of old school, press the flesh, know your name, remember your name. I know your kids' names. I know your wife's name. I know who scored a touchdown. I know when your birthday is, kind of guy. And he was really irresistible.
Yeah. Josh, quick word about Peter before we go.
Well, he had that accent, right? That I guess
Rhode Island. Yeah, he was from
Rhode Island
kind of
accent,
Boston, yeah.
and so I was a student at City College when Peter McDougal was in his heyday, and City College was amazing at that time, and he was credited for building all these community relationships and making Santa Barbara City College at the time the #1 ranked community college in the country. And so he had that accent, he had that way of making you feel important as a student journalist. He took journalism very seriously. He was always very responsive. He didn't try to spin like a lot of people in power do. And so he was great, and he was just very charming, charismatic. And I saw him a few years ago, on a hike, and he's just like, he was a big hiker and just the kind of guy who remembered me, like from 20 years ago. And he was like, Judge Molina, I'm so proud of you and everything you've done. Like, and he did that with everyone he ran into, he was that kind of a guy. So we definitely lost a legend, part of just this, we're losing these people who helped build Santa Barbara as we know
Yeah.
it.
Fred Cass, a prominent physician in town, told me that he used to be in a hiking group with Peter. There were 5 guys. And Peter, before they would go on a hike, would assign everyone a topic. And 2 guys had to argue the positive and 2 guys had to argue the opposite. And then when they got done arguing at the end of the hike, Peter would opine about who had won the debate. And
Oh, wow.
that was kind of who he was. All right, Christina McDermott, Nick Welsh, Callie Fausey, Josh Molina, thank you so much, and thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time on Newsmakers. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
See ya.